Hey everyone, this is Vanessa Chase Lockshin from the Storytelling Nonprofit. Happy Wednesday. I hope everything is going well with you today, and welcome to our lunchtime hangout. So I have to start by saying I really apologize for the weird lighting in the room that I'm in right now. I'm currently visiting my parents, and I don't have my usual computer that I have with me at home that has a much better camera. So if I look a little dark, I apologize. This room is actually surprisingly bright. I don't know what's wrong with this camera on my Surface. Anyways, I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I've been doing these hangouts every Wednesday for the last couple of weeks. It's been lots of fun to be live on video with all of you, to share some new things that I'm working on, and to also answer questions you have. So as I get this started here, I'm also going to start the Q&A box. So if you'd like to send in any questions you have, you can definitely do that as well. Always happy to answer those for you. So it's been an exciting few weeks for me. My book, The Storytelling Nonprofit, comes out next Wednesday, April 6th. So I'm pretty excited about that. We have tons and tons of people who pre-ordered it. I'm very happy to be sending it to all of them. And if you haven't purchased your copy yet, you can still do that over at my website, the Storytelling Nonprofit/book. You'll find out all the information you need to over there. So this week on our Hangout, I wanted to talk about creating a fundraising and storytelling plan. One of the questions I get asked most often by people is, how do we actually integrate stories into the bigger picture of the work that we're doing, whether it's comms or fundraising or maybe something slightly different? How do stories fit into that, so to speak? So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. There's a whole chapter in the book dedicated to this, but I wanted to give you a few tips if you're thinking about this for your organization as well. So the first thing I encourage people to do when they're thinking about using stories as a tool in the bigger context of their work is to figure out, what are their goals and opportunities for storytelling? So by this, I mean, what is this bigger goal that stories are supporting? So in fundraising, for example, stories might be supporting you fundraising a certain amount, or reaching a particular goal with a campaign, or helping you launch a new campaign, something like that, right? And it's important to understand what that context is, because that will ultimately help you figure out what type of stories you need to tell and how to best go about doing that. So once you've identified what this goal is and sort of the initial context for telling that story, the next thing you want to do is think about, what are the specific opportunities you have to tell stories in that plan or in this context of your work. So by that, I mean, what are the opportunities? So direct mail, newsletters, telephone conversations, face-to-face meetings, all these different mechanisms we use to communicate and solicit people. Those are all opportunities for storytelling. And so what are those opportunities you have? And specifically, which of those opportunities do you actually want to use when it comes time to telling stories? So you may look at your fundraising plan or your comms plan and then pick specific opportunities or focus on one channel or one medium. Those are all good ways to start. I like to kind of divide and conquer the whole thing myself. So when I work on a fundraising plan with organizations, we'll typically look at things like, what are their direct mail plans, their online fundraising plans, all of these different things. And then we'll figure out, of those, what are the opportunities for storytelling. So maybe there's a direct mail campaign, or maybe there's a specific campaign for one of their programs, and there's lots of different communications going out around that. So understanding those opportunities is, again, a really good first place to start with your storytelling work. The second thing you want to do from there is then, for those opportunities or for your bigger plan, think about, what are the messages and calls to action that you want to communicate with your audience. So again, we're really laying the foundation pieces to ultimately figuring out what stories we want to tell and when. So the reason messaging and calls to action are important is because this is the things that will ultimately help you, or sorry, let me backtrack there. So your message is the thing that you ultimately want your audience to understand. It's the one point that you want them to remember and hopefully act on when you have a call to action. So everything else in the communication, whether it's direct mail or newsletter story or something else entirely, everything else that's in there should be supporting that message and helping build your audience up to the point where they, A, understand it, and B, want to take action on what you've told them. And so this is important because ultimately, when it comes to telling good stories, we want to choose stories that enhance that message, that help us convey that message more strongly. So before we get into the actual picking of the stories that we want to tell, we want to know what are the messages that we're going to be telling. So for some organizations that are bigger and more sophisticated with their fundraising or communications programs, there will be different messages for each piece that they're sending out. Or maybe there'll be monthly messages or quarterly, or maybe for a smaller organization, you will have 2 or 3 messages that you want to convey over the course of a year, maybe at different times or maybe interspersed in different mediums. The important thing is knowing what those are. So as you figure out your plan and kind of lay this all out, layer in the messages and the calls to action, because without those, picking the stories to tell is really not going to be that useful to you. You need to know those pieces of information. So far in this process, I mentioned understanding your goals and opportunities for storytelling, and then also understanding what messages and calls to action you want to convey at different times. So those are both important things. The last thing I want to suggest you do to kind of build this plan together and really pull it all together in a very cohesive way is think about the specific stories you want to tell. So now you can go back in and look at the opportunities in the message and think about, based on this information you definitely know is going to be in that piece or in that communication, what story makes the most sense to tell here? That's the question you want to answer. So there may be one story that you can use for several different pieces. You may have to find a lot of different stories. You may have specific stories already in mind for some of those things, which is great. And if you don't, that's okay too. This is just your opportunity now to go out and find those stories, because you know exactly what you're going to be sharing with your audience and how stories can help you achieve that more quickly. So those are 3 steps that you can use to kind of get yourself started in planning and creating a kind of a cohesive storytelling strategy or storytelling plan. It really depends on what your job title is and what sort of work you're doing, whether it's fundraising or communications or maybe something else, as to how you'll use this and how you'll develop it specifically for your role. But I do think it's such an important document to have, or an important thing to have kind of thought out, because without this strategy and these other important pieces in place, it's really easy to get off track and to kind of lose sight of where we're going. And I always remind people of this because ultimately stories are just one of the many tools in our toolbox, right? They're not the end though. They're kind of a means to an end. And so to make the most out of them as a tool, we have to have a strategy or a plan for using them. And so figuring out how stories fit in our comms or fundraising plan is the best way to go about doing this. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that's a good Wednesday tip for you as you think about storytelling at your organization. If you're feeling a little unsure where to start with all this, the best thing I can say is, we're right at the start of April, or we're about to be on Friday. Maybe pull out your April calendar and think about what are some of the communications or fundraising pieces that you're sending out, and go through this planning process that I've just told you about and use this as kind of a testing ground or a sandbox, so to speak, to try it out and see how it works for you for 1 month. And if you like how that works, you can do a longer term planning basis, maybe a quarter or 6 months or a full year, and see how that can help you become more organized and also more consistent in how you're telling stories. So I hope that's helpful for you. And of course, you can always come back to this video and refer to it time and time again. I'll have this posted on the blog later today. I do want to answer questions, though, for those of you who are listening live, and I know there's a few of you. So I have the question and answer box up on our Google Hangout page. So you can type in questions there if you'd like. It's always great to be able to answer questions that folks have, whether it's about creating a plan for storytelling or maybe something else that you're working on. I'm always happy to answer those questions as well. As I said at the start of this Hangout, one of the things that people often ask me is, how do I get started with this? How do I get organized with storytelling? And that's why I today talked about creating a plan and how that can be really beneficial for an organization. I think for me, it's one of the best tools that I use in my business and also with organizations that we work for, because it helps us, again, get organized and be consistent and cohesive. And ultimately, when you're looking at the long range of marketing or any sort of campaign or appeal, the more consistent you can be over time, the higher your success rates will be. Great. Well, I'll give folks another minute or two if you'd like to type in some questions for me to answer today. If not, also no problem. We can always wrap up a little early today. Trying to think of some other things I can share with you since we're on this topic of storytelling and planning. I know many people also are coming up to fiscal year ends. March 31st is kind of a common end date for organizations. So if you're looking at doing planning for the next fiscal year, this could also be a really good exercise as well to look ahead to the 2016, 2017 year in planning. Okay, well, I don't see any questions, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up a little early today, but I hope that this segment on story planning was helpful for you. There are a few more resources for this over on the Storytelling Nonprofit blog if you're interested in tracking those down, and I'll leave links below this video to those. There's also an entire chapter in the book, in my new book on creating a storytelling plan and how to actually go about doing that for your organization. Oh, I see one question, which is great. So we'll go ahead and answer this. So the question is, do you find it confusing when the client picture you're showing doesn't go with the story? We often have a picture that goes with the story, but we want to show a client picture as a part of the story or mailing. Thoughts on this? Yeah, so really good question. So there's often, it's often challenging to find the right picture or the right visuals to go exactly with the story that you're telling. And this can be for a number of reasons, right? Finding high quality, good pictures can be difficult. There can be issues with confidentiality where someone doesn't want their picture in the direct mail piece or in a newsletter. And so you have to use a stock photo or a picture of someone else, and that can definitely be a piece to consider. So one of the things that I've done in the past when we've worked on direct mail or worked on a significant piece where there's been visual components is we actually schedule time with a staff member or photographer to have what we would consider a photo shoot to try to get the right picture. So this might seem like, you know, an extra step in that whole process, but if you have a half an hour or even an hour to focus on just trying to get the right shots that will work best for your mailing, you'll probably get a good picture that you can then use that then makes sense with the story that you're telling. So that's what I would recommend doing. If you are pinched for time though, one of the things you can consider doing is actually using a different picture and putting a caption below it that kind of contextualizes what the picture is or how it might relate to that story. You know, it might be, you might say something like, here's a picture, you know, here's so-and-so doing, you know, whatever activity they're doing. Or, you know, just again, kind of giving people some additional context for why that picture is there. So either, as I said, think about scheduling a photo shoot or actually taking some time to put captions underneath the pictures that you are using. Yeah. So the question here, let me just clarify that. So yeah, so follow-up question to that. Did I say the picture of is not of the person detailed in the story or something like that? Yeah. So sometimes, yes, sometimes you may have different pictures in the mailing because of confidentiality issues, which then means that that person whose story you told doesn't actually want their picture out in public, and that's fine. So you may have a picture of someone totally different, and you can say something like, you know, a picture of one of our program participants or something like that, so that there's the implication and the clear communication that that's not actually a picture of the person who you're talking about in the mailing, but someone who's like them, who's participating in a similar program or what have you. But if that's not an issue for your organization, this issue of confidentiality or trying to find pictures of that person, you could certainly use pictures of that particular individual in the mailing. You don't have to use it of someone else. Yeah, so I hope that's helpful. Good question. Yeah, I think there's so many interesting issues around confidentiality. And I think I have a few posts on the blog on navigating confidentiality and trying to kind of best figure out the ethics and also how to tell those stories that we want to tell. But being able to use names or pictures or being able to find some solution around that if that is an issue. Great. Well, I just want to thank everyone so much for joining me here for today's Wednesday Hangout. As I said, I'll leave a couple of links below this video over on the blog later today that have some links to posts that I mentioned on confidentiality and also resources for story planning. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining me. I hope you have a great rest of the week. I think we'll be doing another one of these again next week. Hopefully I will have a better camera and be at home, so the video quality is a little bit better. So thanks so much for being here, and I'll talk to you next week.